Meeting number one, it is Wednesday, June the 7th at 1 p.m. Eastern 49. Welcome. And first, just a little bit of administrative business. If everyone will turn their attention to two seats to my right, Lexi Bensberg. If you'll stand up, please. Wave goodbye to everybody. Lexi is going to be leaving us, and she's done a great job. Appreciate the work. And going on to public administration, master's at Syracuse. Is that correct? Very good. Well, I'm pleased that you're doing something good. Thank you very much. And then immediately to my right, if you'll please stand up. Now we're going to introduce a new member of staff, Fantasia Tackett, and I'm glad to have her on board. Thank you. Very good, thank you. And with all of that said, is there anyone who's got a special guest that they want to recognize other than these two that we just mentioned? Seeing none, call roll, please.
Senator Boswell. Senator Deneen. Senator Douglas.
Present.
Senator Funky Fromeyer. Senator Givens. Senator Mays Bledsoe. Senator Neal. Senator Nemus.
Present.
Senator Webb. Representative Banta. Representative Bentley. Representative Bowling. Representative Branscombe.
Here.
Representative Bray. Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Dossett.
Present.
Representative Flannery.
Here.
Representative Fleming. Representative Fraser Gordon. Representative Freeland.
Here.
Representative Fugit. Representative Gentry.
Here.
Representative Hart.
Here.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative McCool.
Here.
Representative McPherson.
Here.
Representative Palumbo. Here. Representative Raymond.
Here.
Representative Reed.
Here.
Representative Riley.
Here.
Representative Stevenson. Representative Upchurch.
Here.
Co-Chair McDaniel.
Here.
Chair Petrie.
Here. All right, we have a quorum and would conduct business if we had anything to do in that sense. Otherwise, we have some items on the agenda for today. One is completed, 2 military affairs, 3 broadband, 4 personnel. These are going to be essentially updates. I'm going to go ahead and point to 5 and 6. That information should be in your packets. If you have any questions, Jenny Bannister will be your go-to on 5 for correspondence received. Increases, decreases in budget allotments, correspondence received. Jennifer Hayes or anyone on A&R staff for this committee would be appropriate. If you have questions, I would suggest that you review those documents. Now back up to item 2, military affairs, 22 through 23 non-governmental expenditures update NGEs. We have, I hope, Stephanie Roby, in person or live, or in person or remote somewhere. Good, come on up to the table, that's great. Shannon Sword, and I apologize for any mispronunciations. And Alex Kelly. And if each of you will introduce yourselves for the record for today, and in doing so, make sure that your microphone is a really bright green light on its stand so that we can pick you up for the record. If you will introduce yourselves, please.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Roby. I'm Assistant Director at Kentucky Emergency Management. I oversee the administrative side of the house as well as FEMA reimbursements and programs.
Very good.
Shannon Sword, Department of Military Affairs Budget Manager. And I am Alex Kelly, Department of Military Affairs Budget Specialist.
Very good. And we have one more.
Good afternoon, Corey Ann Jackson, Legislative and Congressional Liaison. Thank
Very
you.
good. Anyone that'll be presenting today, if you'll raise your right hands. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Very good. If you will, please proceed and give us an update on non-governmental expenditures and military affairs for the 22-23.
Alrighty. I'll get us kicked off here. Thank you, Co-Chair Petrie, Co-Chair McDaniel, and members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on the necessary government expenditures, commonly referred to as NGE, for state fiscal year 2023. Military Affairs has spent $273 million through May 15th, 2023, sourced from NGE general funds. This is the largest amount ever, primarily due to the Eastern Kentucky flooding disaster in July 2022, which makes up $260 million of the total amount expended.
And just for clarification, I want to make sure to date, and so we've got fiscal year 2023, and for the benefit of all listening, that would be from what date to what date?
Yes, sir. Appreciate the question. From July 28th, of the date of the disaster, through May 15th. Okay, and so about 260 million of the total 273 was in response to the flood disaster. The budget of the Commonwealth that the General Assembly passed appropriates $4.5 million each year for NGE within our line item budget, general fund. The budget bill also allows for additional expenditures for NGEs for governor-declared emergencies, the governor's call of the Kentucky National Guard, and to match federal aid for presidentially declared disasters or emergencies. And the funds for the NGEs that exceed the $4.5 million come from the Budget Reserve Trust Fund. And at the end of the fiscal year, all unexpended NGE funds lapse back to the Budget Reserve Trust Fund. And here's our breakdown slide, and you can see of the $260 million total for the Eastern Kentucky flood, about $172 million has gone towards debris removal, county bridges, and county road repairs, and about $88 million has gone. It's been expended for the utilization of both heavy and small equipment, sheltering missions, on-site restroom and laundry facilities, state emergency operations center support, the purchasing as well as the distribution of water to critical facilities, and security at multiple disaster recovery centers.
Are these direct expenditures out, or are these for matches to locals and other entities, or combination of both? Direct expenditure?
Direct.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And then obviously the Eastern Kentucky flood for fiscal 2023 has been the large, significant majority of the expenditures. But you can notice the breakdown that we have for the Western Kentucky tornadoes. The purposes regarding the expenditures are similar. The Department of Parks and the Red Cross support that they provided for sheltering are also significant with the Western Kentucky tornadoes. And then on this side, you can see the breakdown for the $172 million that was mentioned from the Transportation Cabinet. The overwhelming majority of that was for debris removal, and $3 million was for county bridge repair, and $1 million was for county road repair. And with that, I will hand the baton over to Ms. Roby.
Baton received. Before.
Make sure your green light is lit up and that microphone is close enough to you, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Before we get into the mundane FEMA issues, I would like to point out that we have disasters nonstop in this state. In the last 5 years, we've had 12 major disaster declarations. Recently, USA Today did a study of all counties in the United States. There are over 3,100 counties across the United States.
You may want to move that mic just a little bit closer, please. Making sure equipment's picking you up. Sorry.
They went back to 1990, looking at how often counties had been declared. When you look at the top 10 counties with the most declarations in the United States, Kentucky has 7 of those. We flood constantly. Over the last 5 years, we only had 2 declarations that did not involve flooding. One of them was COVID, although I felt like I was in a flood of germs, but on. When you look at how this process works, I want to give you realistic expectations as to when we can expect funds coming back from FEMA. It's a very long process. The more complex the disaster, the longer the process can take. I can tell you that last year we received our last payment from FEMA regarding the ice storm of 2009. So we work very hard to ensure that what we provide FEMA on the front end is detailed, that we have done our work appropriately, particularly when it comes to procurement, and that we have documentation to support every penny that we're asking for. The more we can do to ensure quality, the faster the money will come back. To date, we have requested that FEMA provide, let me find the data. In the tornadoes, we have submitted 7 projects on behalf of Kentucky Emergency Management for our response efforts, totaling $21.6 million. FEMA has approved $21.6 million. However, they have only obligated a large portion of that, but it has not hit the NGE account as a refund yet. That'll probably be next week. As far as the flooding is concerned, we have submitted $254.5 million in reimbursement request. That'll constitute 20 projects to date. They've obligated 3 for a total of $16.8 million. So we are moving in a positive direction with them. But you need to keep in mind that there are hundreds of applicants across these 2 events. We're only one of those. And all total, probably between the 2 events, FEMA is processing over 2,000 projects. There was a point in time when we first were overlapping the tornadoes and the floods that FEMA probably had close to 1,000 people in this state working. Then we had the horrible hurricane in Florida hit, and so they had resources that were transferred out. Right now, we have about 323 FEMA people working in the state. They have an office here in Frankfort. They have a remote office in Eastern Kentucky and in Western Kentucky. So when you look at this process from start to finish, from the disaster to getting our money back, like I said, it can take a while. When we know that there's going to be an event or an event strikes suddenly, we are going to activate the state emergency response center. That operations center is the coordinating factor for response efforts and meeting the needs of these impacted communities and citizens. So when we activate, depending on the type of the event, we are going to start asking state agencies to come in and provide support depending on what their area of expertise is. We're also inviting in the Red Cross will be there, depending on the event. We have representatives from power providers. LG&E will be in, and they are monitoring restoration of critical facilities, that sort of thing. So when we activate, we do so under KRS 39A100. It's important on many levels because it directs state agencies to help us. It also gives us the opportunity to procure goods and services that are needed by impacted communities. When the event unfolds, we are in constant communication with impacted counties. We are looking to receive information from them that's going to guide us in what we need to be doing to help them respond to and recover from the event. As soon as the wind stops blowing and local officials and their emergency managers are able to talk to us and tell us what they need, we are divvying out those needs to the appropriate agencies. We have so many moving pieces in the heat of the battle. In the flood event, the National Guard moved out immediately. They were pulling people off of housetops and out of trees. We had Transportation Cabinet immediately working to open up roads. Oftentimes, particularly in Eastern Kentucky, they don't have the manpower at the local government level to do what they need to do to make sure that emergency vehicles can get to hospitals. We are sending out, a lot of times the Division of Forestry and the National Guard have cut crews, and they'll go open up critical roads. The state police will oftentimes be assigned into devastated communities to protect them from looters. We have a lot of different things that are going on. Evacuations, we're trying to establish sheltering and feeding and whatnot. FEMA's contention is that all disasters are local in nature, and it's only when they have expended their resources that they should be turning to the state. And when we have expended our resources, then we need to be looking to other areas for assistance. We had many, many counties and cities that were ready and able and did meet the call, and they sent in search teams, they sent in teams to help manage the incident. Incident command in critically impacted communities is complex, and it's more than one county emergency manager can accomplish. So teams were sent in. We had most of you are from counties that were either impacted or you are from counties that helped answer the call. Also, we under 39A 950, which is the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, we turn to other states for large missions. Between the two events, we had help from Florida, Michigan, New York, Texas, West Virginia, and Tennessee. We do a lot of procurement. I would be hard-pressed to see procurement that outstripped what we faced during COVID, but this last one was huge. I can tell you that it's not something a couple of people can accomplish. We have procurement experts at Military Affairs. The Finance Cabinet was quick to bring in people to assist with procurement. Also, we found a couple of ADECOs who were retired procurement experts that we brought on board. So we rely heavily on master agreements. FEMA is very, very particular about how you procure goods and services. If it's not done properly, you will not be reimbursed. If you bought things that were overpriced. If you bought things that were not necessary, you will not get reimbursed. I've been with the agency since the ice storm of 2009. I have no knowledge of emergency management being denied FEMA funding because we did not follow proper procurement. Once we have procured and we are seeking FEMA reimbursement, we have to provide an enormous amount of documentation. Every invoice that comes in is double and triple checked. Nothing is paid without 6 levels of approval. If we receive an invoice that doesn't contain the proper information, it goes back to the vendor. We're not going to pay substandard invoices. We are limited at Kentucky Emergency Management to only conduct and be reimbursed for emergency work. That involves debris removal, and it involves what they call emergency protective measures. That's the cost associated with running the EOC, deploying resources, sheltering, feeding, those types of activities are things that we can request reimbursement for. If we send an agency out to perform a task, then when that agency has completed that work, they submit a request to Kentucky Emergency Management to be reimbursed for their expenses. We oftentimes have well-intentioned cities and counties and others who self-deploy, and maybe they just jump in their car and they rush to an impact zone and help. We cannot reimburse them for that. It's only resources that we procure or deploy are reimbursable. Once the costs have pretty much rolled in and we have reimbursed, we're asking FEMA to provide reimbursement to us for our activities. I can tell you that since my arrival with the agency, the FEMA programs have become hugely complex. It is not something that's easily accomplished. Everything is now sitting on a software platform. You have to upload documents. You have to answer emails. It's complex. It's time consuming. We have one person, and this is all this one person does, is to deal with these FEMA projects. I would like to tell you that I can estimate exactly what we're going to get back for what we have asked for, but these two events were strangely funded. When we look at the tornado event, in a normal declaration, FEMA would be reimbursing 75% of your cost. However, there was a presidential order that went out saying that all disasters that occurred during 2020 and 2021 would be funded at 90%, which is a good thing. To make things even better, FEMA allowed us to identify the 30 most expensive days that the state incurred when it came to emergency work. And that's not just the state, but also the counties, the cities that were impacted. So you had to identify 30 days within the first 120 days of the event. We surveyed all of the cities and counties. We surveyed all of our state agencies that were involved, and we picked out the 30 most expensive days. So for the tornadoes, I expect that we will probably be close to 95% reimbursement to the state for the work that we did. For the flooding, it is a 75-25% split on our projects. However, we also had a 30-day window that we could identify at 100%. So, questions?
Very good, thank you. Anyone, Senator McDaniel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you guys for the testimony today. Ms. Roby, just briefly, you kind of roughed in that you expected a roughly 95% reimbursement rate in the West. When you apply that 30-day 100% reimbursement rate and then balance out the 75-25 for the balance that you referenced, what are you expecting there roughly?
In the West, we will receive 100% for our 30-day window, and everything else would be paid out at 90%. So for that particular event, I think we will go to 95% reimbursement for all of our expenses.
I'm sorry, but what about the East
In the East,
overall?
in the East, overall, I will tell you that an enormous amount of the debris removal expenses were within that 30-day window. So I would be hopeful that we are looking at just above 80%.
But based off of what you were saying earlier about the ice storms, that's not going to be something that we will see in the next biennial budget for recoupment.
No.
Probably.
We will receive some, but realistically, it will span several budgets.
Very good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Very good. I'm going to follow up on that just for a moment. So, looking at historical reimbursements from FEMA and what you see now as far as your applications for reimbursement, do you anticipate the bulk of the curve reimbursements coming in the first 4 years with trail-offs, the first 2 years with trail-offs? What kind of expected curve do you see on those payments, reimbursement payments?
You know, truthfully, it's going to be largely impacted by what's going on in the rest of the country. If we do not have an active hurricane season, if we do not have massive wildfires again in the West, I think we could see the bulk of it within 36 months.
Really quickly, I just want to make sure there was one line left at the very end. Just wanted to make sure everyone understands. You stated that, well, first off, context, just real quick. You've got budget bill, and the budget bill generally appropriates money for certain things, and there is a $4 million or thereabouts appropriation for non-governmental expenses. But everybody understands that that NGE is very elastic. The $4 million doesn't really mean anything to us when we're planning. Because when you've got an emergency come up, then the NGE says, do what you have to for the most part. Fair enough? So that's what we've got, around 400 million expenditure under NGE for the purposes stated. Reimbursements come back in with the last sentence. Then as those reimbursements come back in, they'll go back into the general fund.
Correct.
Okay. Senator Webb?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As somebody who represents the ice storm belt, the problem that we've historically had, describe what happens when the money comes to Frankfurt and what that turnaround time is and what that average or what the counties need to be anticipating at that time.
You're speaking county projects.
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to say that we instantaneously turn those around. It will be much better than what you have seen in the past. FEMA has a designation between projects of small projects and large projects. It used to be that the threshold for a small project was on average something around $200,000. Any projects funded above that, before the applicant could receive any funding from us, they had to provide us with all the supporting documentation that is associated with those costs. Recently, FEMA has changed that threshold. Now, small projects are anything under $1 million. And under Code of Federal Regulations, as soon as a small project is obligated, we have the capacity now to instantly turn around and pay those out. So I think it's going to be vastly improved. Also, on those large projects, FEMA will not consider closing a large project until they have performed what's called a final inspection. And that can be anything from a desk review of documents to going out into the field and actually looking at a repaired road or bridge. So that created quite a delay. And there have been times where we have had final inspections stacked up with FEMA for years. And we're seeing a vast improvement in that. FEMA has designated more people to help. So I think moving forward, the money will be flowing quicker and easier.
I appreciate that, and we've had some real problems. A $200,000 project may not be big to FEMA, but to one of my counties, it's huge. And we have had undue delays to the point of I've had several conversations with Congressman Rogers and Senator McConnell, and I like maybe our lobbying and their influence has helped in this process because it has really been a hardship. And a lot of times Frankfurt gets the blame. It's not always Frankfurt or the agency inefficiency, but I appreciate that, and I think my colleagues need to know that. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Fleming?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to see if you were consulted or referred to when the governor established some accounts that basically raise money from the private sector and corporations and so forth that go into a fund, and those funds were transferred over to an account that SB 99 established. And I guess, like I said, were you consulted or talked to about this account? And then how does, if at all, does FEMA reimburse what went on in terms of that fund being raising money and then transferring over to this other fund? How FEMA comes into that play, if at all?
We had no part in the funds that were raised from private entities. I have no knowledge of that.
Okay, but and I appreciate that, but the money was transferred to another account, and I'm going to assume that FEMA is going to be reimbursing the state. So how will the accounting, how will that materialize in terms of accounting function or purpose or allocation? Do you understand what I'm asking?
I'm sorry. FEMA funds that were raised, that were expended and given, I think you're talking about the fund that went to private individuals. Is that correct?
That's right. It also went to other functions or other entities as well. But go ahead.
There would be no reimbursement for funds that were raised and distributed that I'm aware of.
Okay, and y'all were not consulted, correct, on any of that establishing the account or how that works?
No.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. And given that question, I do want to make sure that that we're a little clear. Right now, we're talking about NGE spending authority. Okay. In addition to that, relative to these two events, tornadic as well as flooding, in addition to the NGE expenditures in both, we also, correct me if I'm wrong, please, we also have SAFE funds, around $200 million in the west and $200 million way plus in the east, that were made available statutorily and funded for specific purposes, or at least guideline principles. And then we also have, in addition to that, relative to these two events, for relief, we have Team Kentucky funds, which were, as Representative Fleming was discussing, were originally created by executive order. We talked about that this morning a little bit. They were off-budget accounts, which I think we kind of frown on at this point. And so Senate Bill 99 combined a House and Senate bill, and those funds have now been brought on budget and have been appropriated and are still working. So we've got SAFE funds in the east and the west. We have Team Kentucky funds in the east and the west, and we have what you're talking about right now, around $400 million worth of non-governmental expenditures pursuant and allowed by budget and statute. Fair enough?
Okay.
Okay. All right, any other questions? I do want to seek a little clarification just to make sure. So as we sit here today, and let's assume through the fiscal year June 30, you would anticipate, anticipate how much reimbursement by the end of this fiscal year? If things went relatively well, how much? Ballpark.
Yeah,
Don't be too optimistic.
I am, trust me, I've dealt with federal grants far too long to get optimistic. Right now, I do know that we have an additional $51.5 million going through the FEMA approval process. I am hopeful that we could see maybe 40 million of that making it by the end of the year.
End of the fiscal year, June
Yes.
30?
Yes.
Any projections about the next fiscal year? And if you don't, that's fair. I'm just asking for ballpark.
I'm going to say it will be roughly 100 million, give or take.
Very good. We're looking at reimbursements, and thank you again for the presentation. I think all of us can probably acknowledge, this is extraordinarily complex. You're not just dealing with all the locals and all the needs and all the emergency type context, but you're also dealing with federal red tape, which is plentiful, and oversight and compliance and all those other type things, large dollar figures, large volumes of entities and people you're dealing with. Yes, yes, yes. One of the other reasons we're looking at this is this. When you have $400 million of expenditures, that makes your eyes open, as it does y'all's. $400 million is a significant portion of even our entire annual budget. You take note of that. That also has some ripple effects. So when you're looking at how your money is appropriated in your budget, and you've got all your numbers set on the pie, when you have a $400 million introduced, it necessarily decreases everybody's percentages and increases in another spot. So it makes those numbers move a lot. And as reimbursements come through, it changes what our revenues actually look like.
Right.
Also, I can't, without saying it, also can have effect on House Bill 8 and the economic triggers that we're looking for. So this increases as part of that system, looking at the individual income tax rate, when we have an expenditure that goes up and the actual increases, that has to be taken account. And this is not a 4 million or a 40 million or an 80 million, this is a 400 million. And something like that can negate one of those conditions pretty easily. So just trying to understand what this is. It's not something we run into, and quite honestly, I hope we never have to talk with y'all again.
Well, I agree. I agree. And to give you some context, if you look back, starting with the ice storm in 2009, when you look at all of the requests that we made of FEMA to carry us, past these expenditures for all of the declarations, we're talking $23 million total. I mean, they weren't hugely complex. We were able to manage them. But now that we're starting to have these massive events, the response is massive.
Very good. Thank you very much. Anyone else, questions, comments? Seeing none, thank y'all very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
On to number 3 on the agenda, Broadband Deployment Fund Implementation Update. Megan Sandfoss, Executive Director, Office of Broadband, newly created, newly minted, and up and raring to go. And John Hicks, not newly minted, and I don't know about up and raring to go, but he is here. Now you testified or presented a little earlier and you sounded kind of hoarse. That's why I say that. You may have been using your voice a lot recently. If the two of you will introduce yourselves for the record, please. Make sure the green lights are really green when you're speaking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Hicks, State Budget Director and Secretary of the Governor's Executive Cabinet.
I'm Megan Sandfuss, the Executive Director of the Kentucky Office of Broadband Development.
Very good. Well, each of you raise your right hands. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to give you an update. I think the last time Megan was before another committee was in late March, and so kind of a little bit of history, but most of what we're going to talk about is what's coming forward. we've had our first round one awards, which I've mentioned to this committee before. We had 47 awards, about $90 million, total investment of over $200 million, including the investment of the service providers and county governments who helped put up some of the match. The $90 million that the state put in was, again, federal ARPA funds. Much of the county funds that were put in for match were county ARPA funds. So we were able to leverage, what's known as the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund at both the state and local level. So touching 36 counties, Megan and her staff now who are monitoring that, these are construction projects, the deployment of broadband infrastructure. And so 13 projects of those 47 have been bid or are in the construction phase. So we're seeing trucks, out on the roads, putting cable up. And so Megan, we're going to tag team a little bit. Megan's going to talk about we're in the round 2 process, and she's going to give you an update.
Okay, so the first round was the state and local fiscal recovery funds from ARPA, and the second round was the remaining state and local fiscal recovery funds and the capital projects fund allotment for the state of Kentucky. We put out the application on February 6th, and we received, we put it out in November, and it was due on February 6th. And we received 103 applications requesting $483 million in funds for a total of $908 million in projects. We had $206 million available, so we were oversubscribed. There's a huge demand for this. There were projects proposed in 77 counties, and there were proposals to serve 127,000 locations. So again, the priority for these projects was those no service locations with under 10.1 speed. So, what we consider, really far underserved or unserved. On February 13th, we published the list of addresses that were proposed to be served and open up the challenge process. And we received quite a few challenges to the applications. We had 72 applications that were challenged out of the 103, and there were 124 total challenges, meaning that multiple challenges were filed against some of the applications. And that was 40,000 unique locations that were challenged. So a third of those locations were challenged. It was a very time-consuming process to get the responses in and back, and so we have finally determined all of those challenges, and we've returned the challenges to the applicants, and now the revisions are being completed, and we'll be evaluating these grants with hoping to award the funds in July. So with regards to the ARPA funds that were allocated to broadband projects, Treasury just issued supplemental guidance on on some of the issues that the ISPs were concerned about on May 17th. So there have been some concerns about procurement and asset ownership that the ISPs needed to have addressed, and so Treasury issued some additional guidance that answered a lot of those questions.
And Mr. Chairman, you'll remember some of the changing rules from the U.S. Department of Treasury and some of these early monies. In this case, these were very positive changes that address some of the specific issues that internet service providers had about ownership and other things about the use of federal funds. So even though they were late, they were helpful in that they resolved a lot of the questions that some of these providers had. I might add, as a part of the biennial budget this past time, you also put in $20 million from the federal ARPA funds for what I call the pole replacement subsidy program. It's called the Rural Infrastructure Improvement Fund. And basically, it was a subsidy to reimburse for a portion of pole replacements, that telephone poles where the cables go on, for projects that were going to achieve unserved service to unserved locations. So similar in a policy approach to the funds that we're doing for broadband deployment, let's try to get service where there isn't service now or where the service is really, really slow. So that is, we put that out in September. We've only had a few applications so far out of that. So that 20 million kind of stands put until it's used up. But I think it's also indicative of the efforts that internet service providers have to go through in order to get pole attachment agreements and work through that process. So I don't see that few applications as reflecting the lack of need for the funds. I see it as this is the timing that it takes in order to get that. And they couldn't incur the expenses that could be reimbursed until July 1 of this past
And
year.
if I recall that correctly, this is not apply for the money so you can use it. It is a reimbursement type system.
Exactly.
So they have to expend before they can tap that fund.
That's exactly right. And it'll be first come, first serve in that regard. So we're not scoring competitively. Let me talk about the next steps. You'll hear the phrase BEAD out of the bipartisan infrastructure law at the federal level, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, BEAD. That's the big next step. We'll walk through the various steps that we're going to be taking, and every state will be taking and their timelines in order to access those funds and deploy this major investment in bringing affordable, reliable, high-speed internet to Kentucky households and businesses. So here's the headline. By June 30th, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, will announce the state-by-state allocations of our share of $42 billion that is available to all 50 states and territories. Some outside entities, I've testified before, have estimated, because the feds won't give you their estimate yet, that it could be in the neighborhood of $1 billion, right? And so Megan and I just talked about the process in 2 rounds of $300 million. And so here we have the prospect of tripling that amount here soon. So in terms of, that's going to be the identification. Now, that allocation decision that has been made by NTIA is based upon updated maps by the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, that they have been gathering more detailed information than ever before in order to come up with a map in every state of served, underserved, and unserved locations. And when I say locations, I mean every home, every business, right? That's pretty massive in terms of a data gathering process and a mapping process. And so all states had the opportunity to challenge in an earlier map of that. And so Megan and her staff and the consultants we worked with put their heads down and dug through and submitted 15,000 approximately location challenges by saying, no, that map is wrong. It's overstating the service levels of 15,000 locations. So the FCC looks at that, and we provided the evidence and the data, and nearly all of those challenges were accepted. So in essence, Kentucky's map grew by 15,000 locations compared to the initial map. So that process is over, and they're, again, by June 30th, we're all going to hear how much money results in it's a formula based upon your share, your proportionate share of unserved and underserved locations. And then there's a subset of that they refer to as high-cost locations. That is another where they took 10% of that $42 billion, and they're going to distribute that as a part of this allocation. So think about the topography of certain parts of Kentucky as maybe representing some areas where you would have high cost there. So we'll see. We've not been told how they've calculated that on the high cost areas, but we're going to see the results come June 30. And so that's going to be the headline. I'm giving you a heads up, June 30. Now that doesn't mean the money's available, right? We've got the law has and the guidance has a significant set of steps that every state's going to go through before we can access that money. I'll turn it over to Megan.
Sure. So one of those steps is we have to complete a 5-year action plan. That is due to the NTIA by August 12th. So that will establish the goals and priorities and serve as a needs assessment, which will inform our initial proposal. So we have been working on gathering data, doing outreach. To complete that action plan, we have a contract with Connected Nation, which is a Kentucky-based nonprofit with broadband experience that we've been working with them since October to help create our statewide plan. We did a 14-stop listening tour around the state during February and March to gather local input. And so we've been also working with the Education and Labor Cabinet, who is producing the companion digital equity plan for the state, which is also a BEAD requirement.
And let me just interrupt for a second. And another method is the governor has at least monthly phone calls with all the county judges and mayors, and we continuously update them on where we are with the broadband, when we had the listening tours. So we wanted to make sure that local elected officials knew what was going on and the door was open. And I know the phone calls have come into Megan's shop from some of those county judges and mayors, you know, so that everybody knew what was going on and when things would happen.
So we also have a state broadband map that we are nearly complete on. It's being reviewed right now. So this is incorporating data that was received directly from the internet providers, as well as data from the new FCC maps, which are granular and location-based compared to the prior iteration of the maps, which were based on census blocks. So this will be a tool that shows all in one place existing funding for broadband projects, and as well as a visualization of the availability of broadband throughout the state too, and it will help us identify all these unserved and underserved locations, which we need to do for the BEAD program. So the next step after the action plan is to submit an initial proposal that is due by the end of this calendar year. And one of the most important things that this will address is how we plan to spend our funds. So we will, follow the provisions in KRS Chapter 224A that was enacted by House Bill 315 during the 2022 session. And once the initial proposal is approved, they will release 20% of our allocation. And then, so we could potentially have funding available in early 2024. So after the initial proposal, we will have to submit a final proposal. We've got another year after the initial proposal to do that, and that's when they will release the remaining 80% of those funds.
And we do not plan to take a year to complete our final proposal after the initial proposal, because, I can just guarantee you that, because we're not going to let that sit for a year. We got maybe $800 million pending, our action on that. And I would say, Mr. Chairman, and I mentioned this before, both this BEAD program and our action plan and our initial proposal and the Capital Projects Fund, which is part of the Round 2 awards currently, the statute you all passed is still very consistent in a policy approach to what we plan to do and what the federal government will accept. And by that I mean you have a priority on no service and a second priority on unserved. And that's consistent with the federal policy here, because the intention here is to have universal access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. And so when we talk to the feds, we always remind them. And here in our state, we've already kind of got a mission, a goal that we're leading to, and that remains consistent. The federal funds can also be used for underserved locations, which is now measured by 100 megabyte download, 25 megabyte upload. Well, I don't even have that at my house, but so there, let's just say let's say we got to the end of the road, and we got the end of the holler, right? I mean, that's an aspiration, right, nationally. Then if we had money left over, we can go to other areas that are underserved. But our focus continues to be on the no service and the unserved. So that's all we have, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Really quickly, on number side, for operation of the broadband office itself, I was going to ask if you had the contract. So you do have contract with third-party Connected Nation. That's ongoing. Ballpark of what the contract cost?
I think it was $4.4 million.
And that was a maximum over multiple years.
Got it.
Yeah.
Employees of the Office of Broadband currently?
So right now it's myself and 2 others. I just had another position approved by personnel to post this week, and then I've got a consultant through the staff augmentation, or one of the contractors through staff augmentation through the IT contract to do GIS for the office. So. And
those 2 that you mentioned, those are exclusive to Office of Broadband?
Correct.
Very good. If you will get back to this committee the following, and if you can't, let me know quickly. I want to know the application geography for round 1 and round 2. So where are the applications coming from? The application, as well as size, scope, dollar figures involved, so we can understand the orders of magnitude of where they're coming from regionally across the state. That's on the application side. And then I need the same on what applications are approved, so we can see where those grants or those funds are actually flowing back out to. Is that very doable?
Yeah, in fact,
I know y'all have reported on some of that.
yeah,
to
we
us before
reported on the first round,
Yes.
exactly, and so for the second round, it'll be kind of the application information, right?
Same type thing. If you can get that, just so we can see where the applications are coming from, and
And let me just add,
Yes.
those will be the revised applications post-challenge.
yes,
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, because we don't want to overstate somebody's initial application.
very good. I think you can note the General Assembly's seriousness about getting to last miles, getting broadband universal starting at last miles, which I understand now is unique in the country.
It is.
Every other state has gone the other direction, and the federal money coming down is following what Kentucky's done, which is a great thing if I understand you correctly. Is the BEAD money that's anticipated direct to executive, or General Assembly needs to appropriate?
It will, well, it's direct to the applicant, the Commonwealth of Kentucky. These are federal funds. We will incorporate in the next biennial budget request our best estimate of a timing and amount, because we want to, just like we do with any other grant program. But we also have the discretion, should we miss the mark underneath it, that we have the ability to increase the appropriation between the interims. But yeah, you'll see in the next budget request our best estimate of how much in fiscal 25, how much in fiscal 26.
Very good. As a second request on docket-wise, can you get me a boiled-down summary of what guidelines or restrictions there are on the BEAD money coming? Like restrictions of use. And if you go, well, that's a 60-page document, just shoot me the whole thing.
I was just going to say,
I understand.
boil it down.
If you can boil that down.
It's 90 pages.
That's what I figured. If you can boil it down, I'll leave that with a capital, all cap if. Last, and this is not fuss, and I appreciate you working on this, but door remains open. Happy to discuss these things in the interim when we have time, space to analyze and get information flow back and forth. It doesn't work well during session. I've not been here a long time, but the atmosphere is thick at that point, especially for something that deserves serious attention, serious analysis, with serious dollar figures being involved.
Yeah, and I
so
would,
when you're
sorry.
making those monthly calls, that's great to locals. It would be good to have the General Assembly involved in that conversation more so than what you and I have been able to do, which is limited over the years. If we could do that, that would be really good. There is one last question I've got. We can have a program in Kentucky that lives and dies by federal grace of grant money. Or we can have a program in Kentucky that has a revenue stream with supplemental grace from the federal government. Now, we put value on universal coverage and starting at last miles for broadband access, and dedicate those federal funds to that rather than other purposes. But looking down the road, even if there's $800 million or more coming from federal funds, that's still grace. That's not a plan for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years out. Much like we have electric and water, which we will always be doing for the foreseeable always. Broadband is probably going to be the same way. So has there been any discussion about a steady revenue stream that can be dedicated toward broadband development? We have a fund, we have guidelines around it. Is there any discussion about that?
Well, first, and that's understand. We have had Megan and I have had some discussions on that. Is ultimately, in all states, what about the sufficiency of the BEAD allocation? Will it achieve? And so we're going to make, in our initial proposal, we're going to make our best estimate for do we think we can, right? Is this going to be enough money to get to all the unserved locations? So that's part of so that'll be iterative, right? So I would say I'm not going to know a whole lot walking into the next session, but we're going to learn a lot through this next 2-year period that kind of gets to the sufficiency question, which is kind of your question as well, is do we need other resources to maintain or to get to the final goal? So I think about that when we had to submit our capital projects fund plan, right? We had to estimate how many households you think this 182 million is going to fund, right? Well, we had round one in our pocket in terms of having data on, well, what did it cost in the estimate for these locations? How do we extrapolate that to future locations? Well, we're in the process, Megan and the staff are in the process of thinking that through further now. We got a second round of applications, right? So we have locality data. We know where they are, and we can get a sense of the estimated price. So to kind of answer your question, I understand it. I think it's gonna take the next 2 years really to learn enough to be thinking about the next 20 years. What should you do as a state to assure that you can either get there or maintain there?
Well, I'm hopefully we'll get there with existing funds that we see coming down. I'm hopeful on that.
Me too.
What I'm most concerned about is maintaining and upgrading over time, just like we do with electric networks, just like we do with water and wastewater and other infrastructure.
And it's an interesting public-private discussion about it's the subscription model, right? Just like it is for those other utilities, is that the subscription price, can it pay for the operating and updating and fixing, right? We just heard floods and tornadoes talk about, well, broadband gets affected, when those events occur as well.
Yeah, very good. Representative Flannery?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I echo your request, Mr. Chairman. Broadband is probably if it's not the number one topic that my constituents want to talk to me about, it is right up there. And I guess my frustration with this is I would really like to see some sort of updated map, graphic breakdown by city of county of how this is being implemented. I think we have shown as a General Assembly that this is a very important topic, given how much money has been appropriated. And if you look at the interaction with the federal government, I think policymakers understand this is a very important topic, but I have many constituents that still want to know when they live out in the country, they live in rural areas. They want to know when they can expect to have reliable broadband. I think it would be very helpful. So any sort of breakdown or projection of when this will be completed, when it will be finished, when it's going to be fully implemented, I'd really like to see that. Thank you.
And I appreciate your comments. And one of the next exciting things going to happen is a map that is I won't know if it's user friendly because I'm an idiot operator, but it'll be the best map you've ever seen. You'll be able to drill down to your own home address, to say what is there, if anything. So the first thing that'll be out there before money is that. Now, second, your broader question is, we are all dependent upon internet service providers, be they privately owned or publicly owned, to get there, right? That is, we have adopted that model nationally. So what we're doing as a set of governments is subsidizing the infrastructure costs, and in some cases, the federal government subsidizing operating costs. The federal government's subsidizing homes that are low income with the Affordable Connectivity Program to be able to help them pay their bills. But so just to let you know, we're kind of sitting with the money as the incentive, but it is the internet service providers that are going to have to deliver. Now, when we talk to local government leaders, and you know them in your communities, they need to lead on, I want every home in my county to be covered. The counties that have done that, are kind of ahead. I have told county judges, because of the timeline I just described to you, you've got time to put together your plan. So there is that leadership that you all have done at the legislative level with the policy and the statute and the funding. But when I talk to local leadership, I say, you need to grab this by the horns as best you can and at least express the vision that this is what we want to do. And I've seen many who have, right? And so we've got a number of counties in this state, who got started earlier, and they're in the process in some cases of hitting every home in their county, and we want every county to do that.
And I second that. Seeing no other members seeking recognition, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Look forward to talking to you and receiving documents. Number four, personnel cabinet compensation and classification study. An update from, I think, our somewhat newly minted Mary Elizabeth Bailey as secretary. And congratulations. Well, I say that, there's more headache, I'm sure.
It's like congratulations or condolences, right?
Yes.
But thank you very
So
much. I
if
appreciate
each of
that.
you will introduce yourself for the records, please.
Yes. Good afternoon. I am Mary Elizabeth Bailey, Secretary of the Personnel Cabinet.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Caldwell. I'm the Assistant Director of our Division of Employee Management at the Personnel Cabinet.
That light is probably not really green, it's just dull green.
Sorry about that.
No, you're right.
Got that. Let's try again. My name is Jamie Caldwell. I am the Assistant Director of the Personnel Cabinet's Division of Employee Management.
Very good. If each of you raise your right hands.
Yes.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Very good. And thank you for introducing yourselves. And we've got a few minutes. It's just an update.
Okay.
One, for you to say, hi, I'm the new secretary, if nothing else. We've been looking at classification study for a couple of years.
Yes.
We've been given updates periodically. The last thing that I recall update is that we hope that the personnel pay schedules, the study by a third independent party will be completed somewhere November or December of this year. Does that still remain?
Yes, November
close?
1st.
Good.
House Bill 444 required that it's completed by November 1st. We are utilizing, as you said, Mr. Chairman, our compensation and consultants, Korn Ferry, to assist us with that. So there is work that is being done in-house.
And just to make sure everybody knows, Korn Ferry is nationally recognized.
Absolutely, yes. They are in 32 states. They are the premier compensation consulting firm. So yes, we are utilizing them. And I'll just move right on into the update if that's okay. I was going to give you a little background and context, but I'm going to understand your time. We have 1,155 job classifications that encompasses our 25,500 classified graded employees. They fall into these jobs. With that said, we are 70% complete of the job classification review. Of that 70%, we have, from the conclusions of the full review that we have done on the job, we have the results of that are 89% of the job classifications are going to have some type of change to them. And when we say that, it's various changes from minimum requirements. We want to make sure that we are reviewing these to ensure that our jobs are not too restrictive on the hiring. When we, if we have a job classification that is maybe a degree requirement only, that we are ensuring that there is some type of experience required as well, or a substitution for that. It's very important that we are not too restrictive. We are looking at things like job titles. Is what people, applicants in the industry, what they are searching for, is that what we are calling the job? So that way it makes it much easier to find when they are looking. We are looking at things, the level of responsibility and special requirements on the job. Does it require licensure or certification? So all of those things are what's going into that. So when I say 89%, it means either we've had, like I said, a minimum requirement change, a title change, possibly a grade change, maybe a special entrance rate's going to be given to the job, a locality premium. So lots of various changes.
This would also include adjustments to entry point and midpoint.
Absolutely, that's what we. Yes.
Yeah.
Now that's with our salary schedule, and so that is part of that as well. Yes, sir. Of the 70% that we have completed the complete review, we only have 11% of those that have no change at all. When we've reviewed, everything is in line with either our point factoring system, which is owned by Korn Ferry, or with market, or with surveys that we have done, or the minimum requirements are still fine. So a very small percentage. But a large percentage that we will see changes to. So that is good. I want to thank the General Assembly, first of all, for allocating the $500,000 to us to continue with assistance from Korn Ferry. We have a small staff of 4 employees that are assigned to that. They're assigned to about 10,000 positions each, so you can imagine it's a huge undertaking. So we really, really appreciate that. We also appreciate the fact that the General Assembly gave state employees last year an 8% increase and a 6% this year. That's going to allow us to be able to adjust our salary schedule, which definitely assists in the recruitment of new applicants and future growth of state government, which is so important, and especially to retain our employees. That's why this comprehensive job review is so important. But yes, to that end, we will have a full report to you all by November the 1st. It will be it will have conclusions and recommendations on fiscal actions that we will need the General Assembly take to implement several of these job changes. So appreciate that.
Very good. If you will, if there's any way to give me or give us a heads up of what you're anticipating before your final report goes out November 1, great.
Okay.
And if I recall correctly, we have allocated money and put over to make sure in advance that once the study is announced, recommendations are ready for consideration in the General Assembly, the money is already there for implementation, so that's not a second issue to follow. It's already there.
Thank you, sir.
Senator McDaniel.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, congratulations.
Thank you
very
so much. Appreciate that.
Very happy for
Thank
you
you,
and
Mr.
for
Chairman.
the Commonwealth.
Thank you.
Speak to me briefly about the compression issue in what we're doing as you work your way through this to ensure that that gets addressed.
Okay. Compression, two-part in this. First of all, as we're reviewing the job classification series, there are some job classes that are just unique in its own, and then there are others that are in, let's say there's 4 or 5 steps to the series. We are ensuring that as we are reviewing all the aspects of the job classification, if there ends up being a grade change, there is not going to be compression within the series or who that they report to. So we are addressing that. Now, in addition into that, the second part of compression is compression that has occurred as a result of lack of, increments over the last 10 years per se. And so that is another body of work that we will have a specific recommendation to for the General Assembly in November in the report. So it's two-part. Yes.
And then I'm going to boil that down to common person language on compression issue of if anyone in the General Assembly has ever received a call of, wait a minute, I've been working at the state government for 4, 5, 6 years and somebody was just hired in and they're making the same amount that I am and I'm training them.
Yes, it's one of our
That's the issue.
It's one of our top 3 complaints.
That's the issue.
Yes, that is compression.
Very good question. Anybody else? Anything else?
No, sir.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for the update, and please feel free back and forth, give us a heads up so we can digest that information effectively, efficiently, and accurately.
All right.
Please.
Thank you
very much.
Appreciate your time.
Again.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then 5 and 6 on the agenda we have already covered, and I'm not really going to look around, so we are adjourned.